Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, a show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. We have a really excited show for you today. We're joined by Lindsay Bridges, who's the Senior Vice President of HR UK Ireland at DHL Supply Chain. Welcome to the show, Lindsay. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Before we jump in, tell everyone sort of a little bit about your background and your journey to where we are today.
I didn't expect to find myself in HR. I did a degree in international shipping business, maritime law, and navigation management. So about as far from HR as you could possibly think. And I ended up working as in my first job was a first line manager for a towage company, so bringing ships in and out of the ports around coast in the UK. And I was a first line manager for them, so I was, running a bunch of guys, talking to customers, scheduling, planning, that kind of thing. And turns out that company were having quite some challenges from an industrial relations perspective. Mm-hmm. And the business decided they needed to make some change. They brought in some new management. And I, with only a few months history with them, kind of ended up being the last person standing in the office environment who knew anything about what was going on in terms of shift patterns and pay and rotas. And I started to work with this new director they brought in, and I got very heavily involved in union negotiations to make some quite big changes to pay and salary and terms and conditions. That was in the early 1990s. I'm working in places like South Wales, like Liverpool, like Glasgow, so quite traditional environments from an IR perspective, and really gave me a really good grounding in IR. But I guess, to be honest, less of a grounding in what HR was all about, which has been interesting and challenging through my later career.
Yeah, was completely changed, right? From where we were then to where we are now. It's like a completely different function, a completely different role, different challenges, different competencies needed as well. So it's been a pretty incredible journey. How did the first, you've been, if I'm correct, at DHL for 10 years now. How did that opportunity become available, and so what's kept you engaged so long?
Well, I mean, actually, to be honest, I've been at DHL a lot longer when you add it up because the businesses were acquired over time.
Oh, I see.
But you're right. I've been with the DHL brand for about 10 or 12 years now, but longer than that, sort of through that logistics industry. It's quite interesting. I was our sister company was a warehousing logistics company, part of the Ocean Group, and I remember being at an event. And my colleague saying, "Oh, Lindsay, you really need to move. You need to come into HR and logistics. I've got a job." And I said, "That's great. I'd love to do that. But I'm also 5 months pregnant. I'm not quite sure that you might want to, it's not the right time." And to be fair, they were brilliant. And they said, no, we want you to come across and you come and join us after your maternity leave. In mid-1999, I basically came back to work after mat leave and straight into a new regional HR manager role with the logistics business, which is 21 years ago now. My daughter was 21 last month, and that's been my sort of first entry into logistics back then.
Wow, what a journey. One of the things we want to jump into on today's show is sort of the benefits and challenges of taking international assignments, right? What was the first assignment that you took? And let's sort of talk everyone through the process. Why did you take it? What were the challenges you faced, etc.?
I'd always said that I wanted to work abroad, and I always kind of thought I wanted to do that. My husband grew up in Australia, so he had no real ties here in England, and I think wanted to go and live somewhere hot and sunny again. We had a little bit of a false start originally, and it's interesting because I found it was a real big challenge to overcome this hurdle. Mid-2005, I was offered the chance to go to Los Angeles and take a role there. And I'd gone out and done my look-see trip, and I'd kind of got things kind of sorted in my head. We were going to go and do that. And all of a sudden it was stopped, and I didn't really understand why. There was 2 jobs on offer to me then, still here in the UK. One more of the same, more regional HR, and the other to be the HR lead for our functions in Europe. And I kind of took that one because it was something different, something I hadn't done before. And that was probably my first foray into European roles, if you like, albeit based in England. And then a few weeks later, I was working for XL at the time, XL Logistics. Yep. And a few weeks after I made that decision, DHL announced they were going to acquire XL. And that was back in the end of 2005. And I found myself in a really nice position that set my career up quite well, because I found myself being the functional HR business partner through that acquisition. And so for 4 months, all I did was leading the HR work stream around, there was 2 functions in every country in Europe, and we had to figure out a way to bring those together. So when the acquisition took place, we had 1 structure, not 2.
Pretty tough role to take on then when you've got 2, you're thrown in the deep end.
Really, really interesting. And that was probably the first time I really traveled outside of the UK for work. And whilst I was a bit disgruntled about the American rule not coming off, I understood then why they'd put that on hold, given the acquisition.
Yeah, they probably couldn't discuss it at the time.
Yeah, no, they couldn't tell me. Absolutely, yeah. So that was pretty interesting, and I did that European rule for about 18 months, but it was still based in England, and I was looking after functions. And I remember going to my boss and saying, I'm really missing the operational HR role. I'm missing being a business partner to an operational business rather than to the functions. And it was then in mid-2007 that the opportunity came up to go to Eastern Europe and to be the HR lead for what we had then was about 8 countries in Eastern Europe, or Central Eastern Europe, I guess, really you would call it.
Yeah.
And
is that the one in Prague?
Yeah, that was in Prague. So I managed to, they agreed that I could live and base myself in Prague. So my husband and daughter, so my daughter was about 8 at the time, we prepared to relocate there as a family.
Mm-hmm. How was that for you and the family? Because as a young dad myself, and for other HR leaders listening to the show, I'm sure these opportunities are going to come. What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, and even before I left, I do remember a panic attack one day in the office and bursting into tears because I got the organisation chart of my team and I couldn't pronounce anyone's name. And it was just a complete, a real kind of, seems like so simple and really a bit silly, but it was such a thing. It was like, how am I going to go and run these people when I can't even say and pronounce their names in Hungarian and Russian? And
yeah.
It's really, that was a bit of a wake-up call. And I must admit, Grace, there were a couple of points at which I thought I would, this was the wrong thing to do, and I was too scared and I would kind of chicken out. And my husband was the one who was really pushing it. He was a stay-at-home dad. He gave up work when our daughter was born. So for him, it was what he wanted to do. He wanted to experience living in other countries. And he almost he got me on this escalator and I was on my way up and I couldn't get off. And I don't regret it for 1 minute. But I'm so grateful that he did, because otherwise I think I might well have just given in to those fears that I had.
I told you before the show, right, that I had some international roles offered and I was too scared to take them on. So all credit to you to be able to do that. One thing I was going to ask, you mentioned when we first spoke about when you went to Prague that business was quite tough in terms of HR meant something different. It's very much personnel and payroll, not business partnering. So how did you overcome that? What kind of steps did you take?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that since we last spoke, actually. I mean, it was when I went to Eastern Europe and across all of the 8 countries there I looked after, the country managers viewed HR as personnel, administration, payroll, and really nothing else. So the thought that they might involve you in recruitment or discussions on talent just didn't cross their minds, to be honest. And it was quite an immature function back, 12, 13 years ago in some of those countries. I think 3 things really helped me. The first was the CEO I worked for, because he just basically said anytime they came to him with anything that was HR, he was British as well, anything HR related, he said, have you asked Lindsay? And so that got them into a mindset of, oh,
that's great.
I better go and talk to Lindsay. So that was really, really important. That was the first thing. The second thing was around providing some data and metrics that helped them. So turnover was really high. It was like 25% in some countries, voluntary turnover, but they had never thought about what that might cost them as a business. So I remember doing quite a lot of analytical work on the cost of turnover and presenting that to them and saying, this is what this costs us, hard money to your bottom line. That was another thing that made them realize that there was some value. And then the third thing was, and this was challenging, but we did have to upskill and even change some of the people in the HR function, because they'd been brought in to do a different role, a kind of administrative kind of role. And in some cases, people really stepped up out of that into a much more rounded HR manager, business partner role. And in other cases, they didn't. And we had to find alternatives. In a couple of instances, we brought in a more senior HR person, if you like, to lead the team. So that was also a challenging change. But I think it was those three things that began to make the difference there.
To no fault of their own, right? For many of them, they were there to do a role. They were doing their role. But,
they were employed to make sure people were paid on time and they got their offer letters on time, but they hadn't been employed to think about anything different, because that's really not how the business was set up. And these businesses were very, very small. I mean, our business in Slovakia at this time was, probably less than 100 people. Today it's 3,000. Yeah. Wow. So part of what I was doing was setting it up for growth as well. Part of the change was about preparing for this, this growth that was coming in the future.
Mm-hmm. So next role comes up in Germany. What was it about that role that said that you were like, right, the new challenge?
Bigger role, and it also reported at a different hierarchy level. So it was sitting around the global team, because at that point they created a region of 12 countries in Europe, mainland Europe, that sat on the global team. So it was a step up as well for me. Bigger role, bigger scope, bigger geography. But what was super interesting from a business perspective was suddenly I was managing country HR directors who kind of were pretty senior and knew what they were doing. And in Eastern Europe, I'd managed people who knew the legislation within their own country, but it was relatively small and they were relatively inexperienced. I brought more experience. When I went to mainland Europe, the lady who ran HR in Italy, for example, had probably been there 10 years. She'd been very senior, and I couldn't add value in terms of expertise. So I had to find a way to add value in a different way. And that was really, really challenging to begin with, and had to learn how to question rather than, make assumptions. That was quite challenging for me.
Yeah. Did you find that you kind of needed to immediately demonstrate some type of credibility amongst all of those other senior peers in some way?
Yeah. And it was hard, and with some of them it was easier than others, and that's where some of the cultural challenges come into play, because some cultures like to work and have a much more emotional attachment and get to know you really well as a person, and other cultures are much more direct and just want to get things done. And that was the first time, I guess, really I'd managed both of those extremes. Yeah. So I pretty quickly figured out that I had to manage those individuals in my team in different ways, according to not just their own preference and style, but their cultural background as well.
Yeah. What was the main challenge that you were the business segment was facing when you moved into the role?
I think our mainland European business in that time, it was split out from the rest of the EMEA region. That allowed us to see where we were running things really well and where we had some challenges. So some of the challenges then were around our overhead structures, how we got fit for growth, and how we could bring more flexibility into the labor that we had there. Quite traditional labor that maybe wasn't fit for purpose for what our customers wanted going forward.
So how does HR add value?
So I spent a fair bit of time working on, I did this in that job and in the most recent job I did in Europe before I came back to the UK, looking at organizational design, looking at blueprints, looking at spans of control, looking at hierarchical layers in the business, and really challenging, well, if it can work this way in one country, why can't it work that way in another country? And really trying to work out what was the optimum org model, and then quite honestly, challenging the business and that, and then project managing some of that through to make sure that we were really delivering what we said we'd deliver.
We were talking before the show as well, because I always assumed, and people may assume, that it's quite easy to then come back to the UK, back home, but it's actually anything but, it seems.
Everyone I talk to says that's really difficult, and you're right. That's counterintuitive. You're coming home. There's some stuff that's great. I can understand what people are saying to me in the supermarket. I know what food I'm buying. I'm not going to make a mistake. But actually, you find, or we find certainly, that people's lives had moved on, and we weren't a part of that. And so it's not as easy just to slot back in. But no, we came back and we chose to move house. A teenage daughter, no natural way into the community. And then what you realize is everyone's got a life, and their life has got the routine. They visit their mum on the Sunday, they go out with their sister on a Saturday, or whatever that might be. And when you're an expat, nobody's really got that routine, because everyone's in that stage of move, and that does make life easier in terms of moving. When you come back home, it's much harder, and quite frankly, no one's really interested that you've spent your last 10 years living abroad and done all these wonderful, exciting things. You're generally not. And that's really hard, because that was my life.
Yeah. You want to talk about it and share, and people are like, yeah, all right.
And other expats are interested. So when you move in expat circles, everyone's interested. You go back home and it's like, yeah, okay. and people don't mean anything badly by it. It's out of their world, and it was tough. Moving back was tougher than either moving to Prague or Germany, for sure.
Well, just to sort of summarize, and for everyone who's just either just tuned in or listening now, kind of what are the sort of main benefits of taking international assignments, and then what are some of the things that you think people should look out for along the way?
Sure, no worries. I mean, the benefits for me, certainly I think from a professional point of view, it's really broadened my horizons. It's given me the chance to live in different countries and experience it, not just kind of see it superficially. I think that's really quite important. It's given me the chance to work with different people and then have to reflect on my style and how I might need to change to manage different people in different ways and different cultures. I've really enjoyed that and got a lot out of that. I think I've learned a lot because I think I've seen how the same thing works in different countries, and being able to then say, oh yeah, so when you talk about interns, that's the same as we would talk about work placement students. So I do understand what that is, and you can kind of make those business comparisons quite well. So I think I've learned, and I think it really has built my confidence, as I said, in terms of, yeah, no, I can do this. And it's given me a level of assertiveness and confidence I mightn't have had before. Amazing. And I think from a family perspective, we've just loved the chance to travel and to explore and to be forced into new scenarios. I think we're quite a close family now. And I don't know if we'd been as close if we just.
I was going to ask you that. Do you feel like you're strengthened the relationship with your partner and with your daughter?
I think so. I mean, we've been through some tough stuff and some interesting stuff, and I think it probably has. It's certainly strong. If it had been the same in the UK, I just can't compare. But it certainly is strong. Yeah. And I think some of the watch outs for me are some of the things to think about. I mean, don't be afraid. Just go for it. If I had listened to my inner voice, I'd still be sitting in the UK, and I wouldn't have gone. There's no doubt about that. So you just have to make that kind of leap of faith. And trust that actually it will work out, and also reach out and ask for help. And sometimes we're not very good at that, but I think that's quite important as well.
Amazing. Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for taking the time out to join us on the show. Really appreciate it as well. Before we wrap up and I let you go, I'm going to jump into we have like a quick fire round for each guest. So I'm going to ask you six questions, and you have no more than 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers. Are you ready?
No pressure then, right?
I always say it to everyone, they're like, what? All right. What was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a senior HR leader? My own self-confidence. Yeah. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received? When you're working with another senior female, it's don't try to be the best female. It's about supporting each other on that way up. It's not trying to compete. And I really read that once, and I really took that to heart, and it made me change the way I was acting in a very positive way. Love that. Never had that one before. Love it. Oh, there you go. Yeah. What's one book you'd recommend to our audience, and why? Do you know, I really like Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In. I really have taken a lot of thought out of that, and I really would recommend that. Yeah, it's a great book. I'll copy it in for everyone. If you could switch jobs with someone, who would it be? I don't know. Sometimes I quite think I'd like my boss's job, because then I could tell myself what to do. Don't we all? Yeah. I would love to. In my early career, I did a lot of sailing and working offshore with kids, taking them away on long ocean trips, and I would love to do that. Oh wow, that's amazing. If you in terms of internet resources, in terms of how you stay up to date with current events, sort of network benchmark, what's your go-to sort of online resources? I typically online, I use LinkedIn a lot as a way of getting information from other people, and then I would take it on from there. And I also love listening to TED Talks. Love it. And then last one is, what's one thing about your business that you're most excited about? Oh, I'm so excited about our UK business and a whole process of culture change that we've recently embarked on as a UK senior leadership team, in terms of how do we want to change the way we come across, bring more vulnerability and humility to our teams, so that we can really be the company people want to work for in the UK. Wow, we'll save that for episode 2. Yeah. As well. Well, look, thank you so much for taking the time out to join us, and really appreciate that. Apart from that, I'll let you go, Lindsay, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Actually, I'll see you in 3 weeks. Yeah, right? See you at the event in a couple of weeks, and thanks ever so much, Chris. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. No problem. See you later. Bye.